When are we scheduled? All right, so what happens when you actually get arrested with drugs? How many have had policing and criminology? Or no, corrections, sorry, policing corrections? Okay. So this shouldn't be kind of a review here, but remember there's 4 parts to the CJ system once the person's been arrested. So first thing is got to go through pretrial and prosecution, which remember it can end there during pretrial. They plea bargain it out and so on, and the person diverts out of the system. But if they go on to trial, which is what adjudication is, then found guilty, not guilty, out of the system. Sentencing can be a whole plethora of different things that they can get. They can get just a fine. They can get drug diversion. They can get a million different things that can happen. And remember, they can get several of them grouped together. Person can have prison time, probation time, fines, drug treatment programs, and so on, all lumped together into one sentence. If they're being sent to a place like bars, of course, is our last part, corrections. Okay, and again, they can be sentenced to a jail, which means a year or less, or they can be sentenced to a prison, which is more than a year. Now, that does not mean automatically, if you remember from corrections, the longest sentence I've seen is where the guy had 5 DUIs. Each one he was sentenced to a solid year. He did all 5 years in the county jail, because none of them were to prison. Okay, so just depends. But all 4 parts. Okay, and remember, there's different ways a person can make it into the system. If you look at that lovely big old map we've got out there that shows all the different colors, how a person can bounce around through the system. So your book has it in there too. Everybody likes that picture. Okay. Corrections includes a bunch of different parts. Probation. Okay, you're still under the supervision of the correctional arena. Okay, you're just doing your time without bars around you. Okay, and of course we can lock you up, which is the incarceration side. And a person can be released from incarceration to parole. Now, juveniles, remember, we call that aftercare. We don't call it parole. We use the nicer words for the juveniles. Okay, but that parole is not guaranteed. It's conditional. You know, they can put all kinds of different limits on it. And of course, it can, of course, be revoked. Okay, as can probation. And sometimes people get probation in lieu of jail or prison time. You screw up the probation, then we're going to send you to jail, we're going to send you to prison, whatever it is they're going to do. So different parts to the system. Now, I'm going to say this with a very straight face. Your book says there are things in place at every part of the criminal justice system to make sure we don't lock up innocent people. See, I managed to get that out with a straight face. Does that always work? Is there anybody who thinks it does? I'm going to sell you some land that has a view of the Pacific from the Brooklyn Bridge. Okay. Obviously, the system can get screwed up relatively easily. Okay. Juries love eyewitnesses. They absolutely love them. They think every word that comes out of their mouth is the gospel. So when a person goes, he didn't, even though she did it, they'll go, I didn't. That witness pointed to him. It has to be. And off he goes. There was a young man who sat for 13 years on death row because the prosecutor, who eventually admitted it, coached a witness to point the finger at that particular individual because a police officer had been killed. And it's kind of all bets are off when that happens. 13 years. He entered the system as a 24-year-old. He was nearly 40 when he got out. Can we give that time back to him? No. Not in a million years. I don't care what money they give him. That's not the point. You can't give him time back. So, yes, innocent people can and do make their way through the system every day. Do we have things in place to supposedly help? Not? Yes, of course we do. but it's not that simple by any means. Now, juveniles, completely different than adults, although they track similar to adults. They're just more likely to be diverted out of the system because they don't want to lock up kids. Even when we do lock them up, there's like a million different ways they can do it. If you take a juvenile class, they'll talk about things like blended sentences, you know, where the kid can go to juvenile first, and then if they don't straighten up and fly right, then we can send them to the adult side, and so on and so forth. There's a million different ways we can mess with adults. But the main difference between juveniles and adults is generally, with the exception of that blended sentence, they can't be held past the age of 18 or in some states 25. They cannot be executed. And the terminology we use for the whole system for juveniles is different. They're not arrested. They are detained. They're not incarcerated. You know, there's a whole laundry list of different terms. All means the same stuff, but anyways. So, we arrest a lot of people for both. No surprise there, okay? Certainly more than violent crimes. And honestly, if you count the number of violent crimes that are associated with dope, those numbers would change even more. More than property crimes, more than DUI. And when we just look, dope's our number one cash cow in the criminal justice system. And what's really interesting is how many in federal prison are there for drugs. Now, granted, most of that is kind of drug trafficking, distribution, that type of thing, some more serious type drug offenses. But the majority, the flat out majority of federal prisoners are there for some sort of drug related crime, which is not the same in the state system. The state system goes down, property and DUI are the highest in the state system. Okay. Questions? No? We're good? Okay. Two terms you need to know. We separate them generally into two categories. Trafficking. That's getting it from the origination point, whether that's the cultivator or so on, okay, the beginning, to a level where it can be parceled out to the individual user. Manufacturing, distribution, possession with intent to sell, and so on. Possession, it's your own use, personal use, okay? And the quantity that they will accept for personal use depends upon the drug. Because the amount of drug for a person that's taking heroin is going to be in itty bitty teensy weensy little amounts versus the amount somebody might have of weed. Okay? So it depends on the drug. So trafficking versus possession. So let's shift to the federal side as to what they do. Three main acts. It's all the same one, they just keep revising it. Okay? Starting with the original Controlled Substance Act in 1970. The last time it was modified was in 2010. And this is as they continue to increase the penalties for most of it. And this was the penalties per the schedules. Remember, back to your 5 schedules. So penalties for Schedule 1, penalties for Schedule 2 are by far the most severe, and then as you move your way down the list. Marijuana is considered separately, even though it is Schedule 1. The only main difference now is feds still call it illegal. That's it. That's all. There's no middle ground there. Where states have bounced all over the map from illegal to decriminalized to fully legal. And even they're fully legal, sometimes it's legal for medical only versus recreational and so on. So marijuana kind of sits off to itself to the side there. But obviously all the penalties, as they bounced up and down. I told you about the guys with the marijuana that received the death penalty. Yeah, well, that doesn't exist anymore. There is no death-eligible offense in drugs unless it involves a death-eligible other crime. So if a trafficker hunts down and murders somebody, yeah, he can receive the death penalty, but it's not about the drugs, it's about the murder charge. Okay, so drugs and murder, or drugs and death penalty no longer are apart. So we had 2 anti-drug abuse acts, and this one was adding these special circumstances. Did somebody die because of your sale of drugs? And this is a common one that's used now. So I sell her some heroin, and I've cut it with God knows what, and she overdoses and dies. Okay. Well, they're now able to come back to me and say, because of you changing this, because of you adding this, you are now responsible directly for her death and can be charged as such, as long as that drug's one of control one or in the first 2 schedules. Lower schedules doesn't matter. Okay. The other is getting after people who market to the younger crowd, because dealers were sitting around, they were getting a young-looking high schooler to move around the middle school and so on and start marketing their stuff. And they start by giving it away free. Try this, it'll make you feel good. There's a lot of drugs out there. Heroin, 3 times at most before the person's addiction has started. Meth, once. Fentanyl, once. So fine, I give you $10 worth of drugs, and I now have a permanent customer for life until you die or go to jail. Okay? So it doesn't cost me very much to get people. And kids, oh, come on, try this. I double dare you. And off they go. And I got a whole new school full of customers. And to support their habits, they're going to sell to their friends. And it's just a nice little cycle that keeps going. So this was specifically addressed by a person over the age of 21 selling to anyone under 18. Okay. Another one of those special circumstances, close to a school. And you look at these doubled penalties, selling to a kid, selling near a school, doubled penalties. So if you're facing 10 years, now you're facing 20. Okay. They also, if they found it as a company, some of these guys actually have incorporated themselves, which they found out was a mistake, because then it was even anyone connected to that company could be arrested. And that's 2.5 times. So our 10-year sentence just became 25 years. Okay. And it's all about the penalties. And also here's where we get into the asset forfeiture, criminal asset forfeiture. I told you our training facility in Trabuco Canyon is worth about $27 million as raw land. That doesn't include everything else that's on there. And that was part of the asset forfeiture. They got it off a drug trafficker and turned the whole thing into our training facility. You watch cops running around trying to arrest drug dealers and they're driving a Lambo, flying a jet. It's not like our budgets let us buy this stuff, okay? We're in the Ford Focus. That's what we can afford to drive, okay? This has all been confiscated from these guys. And then it's used usually in trafficking type operations. Okay? You cannot go after a drug dealer who lives on a $100 million yacht and you show up with their $50 fishing boat. They're going to maybe figure out something's not right. Okay? So that's where they keep these around. There was an old television show that really kind of played this big time, Miami Vice. And if you watched in there, you'd see them using all these drug assets that had been seized, fancy cars and boats and planes and so on and so forth, because they have to play the part. They absolutely have to play the part. So, and they'll do it, but they'll also get you too. You know, with that friend who's got an 8-ball of Coke in their pocket, and you just lost your car. So, careful who you let in your vehicles. So, simple possession, personal use. Maximum of a year in jail. Unlikely that you're actually going to go for the first time. Unlikely, unless you have a really crummy lawyer or you want to go to jail. But the fine, they'll get you on a pretty good fine. Second time, yeah, you're probably going to do some jail time. Maybe not that much. You can face up to 2 years, but it's unlikely you'll get that. Okay? A month, 2 months, more likely. But the fine goes up. Okay? Third time, well, things can get really ugly the third time. Now you're talking prison time and a serious, serious fine. Questions? I know you all have had at least some criminal law, so you should be familiar. You should know the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. Felony, you can be sentenced to prison, which means over that year time. Can a person still be sentenced to jail for a felony? Yes, they can. They don't have to be sentenced to prison, but they can. A misdemeanor must be sentenced to jail, not prison. Okay, now back to our guy with 5 DUIs. Yeah, each one 1 year. Okay. All of it served to jail. Okay. Most of these drug offenses are going to be prosecuted at the federal level for a couple reasons. Mainly because states all have different laws, so you have to play how that state wants it versus the federal law, so it starts getting convoluted. Plus, federal carries more penalties, federal goes more fines, and probably the reason the prosecutors love it the most, what's the best way to put it? It's easier to prosecute at the federal level. Their evidence laws are different and a little easier than state law. So they'll start at the federal level. The state's still free to follow up with their own, so guy, again, can be sentenced to both, but federal just is easier. And state is all over the map. Depending on where you live, depends a lot as to what's actually going to happen to you. So, if they can make it federal, generally they will try. Questions so far? Paraphernalia, things used in the use of drugs. A scale, anybody who's serious about cooking or baking has a food scale. They're not illegal to possess unless you're using them to measure out your quantities of drugs. Then it becomes an illegal item. People who are diabetic, people who have epilepsy, people who have severe allergies may carry around with them various medical devices, syringes, needles, auto-injectors, and so on. Illegal to possess? In general, yes. Most of those people, epileptics, diabetics, and so on, carry it under a doctor's prescription. You know, I'm a diabetic, this is what I have, so on and so forth. But in anybody else, well, it depends. What happens if you have livestock? Anybody I know who has any kind of livestock, I don't care which one it is, cow, sheep, chicken, goat, or horse, they have a whole laundry list of all this stuff, along with a whole pharmacy sitting in their barn or chicken coop or wherever. Buyer on the order of, it's worded a little bit different for veterinary medicines, buyer on the order of a veterinarian. So as long as you have that, again, you're perfectly fine. But you're driving to downtown New York with your ranch truck and you forget that you have that whole pharmacy and stuff in your, you're going to be in trouble in New York. You're absolutely going to be, because even with a veterinary, only on the same premises as a veterinarian. Okay, so you have to be careful with state law because they just change from one side to the next. Okay. Paraphernalia. Now, here's one of the biggest disasters we did in trying to control drugs. Mandatory minimums. People were outraged when murderers were sentenced to 20 years to life. And they're in a state that has two things, if you remember from corrections, good time and work time. Good time, stay out of trouble. Every day you stay out of trouble, we take a day off your sentence. Work time, pretty much the same thing. For every day you work, you get a day off your sentence. So if I do a day where I do my job in the prison and I don't get into trouble, I actually get 2 days off my sentence. So back to our 20-year dude. And he's walking out after 5 years and they're going, how did he do that? Well, first of all, you have to look at the good time and the work time, which cut a whole bunch off of his sentence. And then he got parole, which can very often at that time be considered after serving half your time. Well, after he did his good time, work time, he was down to 10 years. Half time, 5 years, considered for parole. He's been a great guy. He's done everything we've asked him to do. Kick him loose. And the victims are going, how did 20 go to 5? And they were getting outraged, obviously. So laws were passed that you must serve so much time. And they worded it differently depending on the crime. Sometimes it was just, you will serve this much time of your sentence before anything else can happen. Some states got rid of good time, work time. Fed's heading the list there. There's no such thing anymore. Some eliminated parole altogether. Well, of course, then there was a lot of outcry over that, saying what was the incentive for anyone to do anything behind bars to rehabilitate themselves if it wasn't going to mean anything. So there was a lot of back and forth with it, but for drugs, there was a minimum that they had to serve. That depended on what drug, how much, all the circumstances involved, but it got pretty crazy. A lot of states went to 85%. That was the minimum time they had to serve. So if they got 10 years, they had to do 8.5 years before anything would happen. Anything. Okay. So all these people wanted that. States, cities, counties all went, okay. And correctional people went, are you people nuts? Where the hell are we supposed to put them? Because all of a sudden their populations exploded. This is when we had jails like ours, where 30 people, we had some dorm housing. Those were built for 30 people. At any given time, we had between 90 and 120. They were sleeping in the day room. They were sleeping on top of the tables in the day room. They were sleeping on the floors. They were sleeping in the showers next to the toities because there was no room. Needless to say, if you remember your psych in Hell's Kitchen, you cannot put that many people in a teeny tiny space. And remind you, these are people that don't play well with others without having a war zone. But what are correctional people supposed to do? You brought them to us. We have to house them. Something. What are we supposed to do? Hang them from the ceiling? Okay, let's build another jail. I don't want to pay more taxes to build another jail. Oh, I don't want you to build a prison there. That's too close to us. You got to build it way out there. And then find somebody else to pay for it because we're not paying for it. You see how this just snowballs. And the population crunch got so bad, courts were asked to intervene, and they did, by mandating releases. So now all of a sudden people got released. If they were at a certain point in their sentence, and it was different depending where they were released. I'm power vested in me, you are now free. Unconditional release, no parole, no nothing. And then citizens started finding out that a lot of people were being released. Well, these aren't exactly nice people. Some of these are, the very high end of the, oh my God, people that you don't want out. They didn't have a choice. One here that was released from Texas. He was under a death sentence in 1966. Furman comes along in 1972, and he is now life with the possibility of parole, and Texas was one of them that was caught in that release by the power vested in me, and Kenneth walked out the door. In less than a week, he had killed again. He's the only person, to my knowledge, in U.S. history, not just Texas, that has been arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for murder twice. He was executed the second time. And he didn't believe he was going to be executed literally until he was walking into the death chamber a block down the road. Because he'd walked before. Why wouldn't he walk this time? Well, he didn't. Those 3 people that are dead didn't have to be. He's not somebody I would have ever thought would have been. It's like releasing Charlie Manson. Why are you releasing Charlie?
Okay, that was the caliber of what they released. So this is a problem. This is a problem. And it's a lot easier to put a law in place than it is to undo it. The people that wanted it thought it was a great deterrent. They recognized, and I think most people would agree, that drugs were having a severely bad effect on society. You know, this is that whole tough on crime type of mindset. Judges kind of liked it, kind of didn't. They didn't have to do all the messing around they had to do before figuring out exactly where they were. This is your minimum, that's it, that's all. Okay, we can go on from there. Other judges complained, saying we can't take an individual person's circumstances into effect. That's just not allowed anymore. So that's not good. Okay, and what we found was from the law enforcement, and of course prosecutors love this too, it was very easy to turn the low-level offenders because they wanted to stay out. So they would turn on the upper-level guys pretty easily. So that makes prosecution easier, you know, when you have that co-conspirator witness to talk about things that are up there. But it doesn't change what's going on in correction. It just doesn't work. Texas went through a massive prison building boom, right as you guys were born, right about then, when they got rid of the old system, the building tender system, and revamped the prisons. And they thought at the time they built a huge number of prisons and they were going to be great, wonderful, and terrific for, you know, very long periods of time. No, they're grossly overcrowded like everybody else. Okay. Some of our prisons, the oldest jail in the country, I wrote about, oldest jail in the country back in Massachusetts, is still running, and it was built in, don't quote me on the date, but I want to say 1746, and it's still up and running. It's in Salem, Massachusetts. In which county? Okay. It's still running. We've got Folsom and Quentin. They're 18th century. They're still running. And they look like they're 18th century. Okay. Because they don't dare turn them or tear them down. Where are we going to put them? There's talk of reopening Alcatraz. I don't think that'll ever happen. New York floated the idea, this was hysterical, what they called prison ships. They were going to take decommissioned large warships from the Navy, strip all the important stuff out of it, turned it all into prison cells, and anchor them off the coast of New York and keep prisoners in there. They did that actually for a short period of time. They do have 2 boats that they use in New York Harbor, that they'll use it more as a jail, a temporary jail. But that's the problem. Where do we house these people? We can't lock them all up. Not unless we want to build double the prison capacity that we have now. I don't know about you, but I'm about taxed out. Not to mention you got to find people to work them. Working in prison environment is not a pleasant place to be, and are not paid super duper well to work in not nice place. So you got to staff them. There's jails in California that are brand new and never open because they can't get the personnel to open. They're just sitting there, waste of money and time. Okay, that's a perennial problem as well. Now, obviously, the people on the other side, a lot of these individuals were low-level offenders. Okay, and we know lock them up and throw away the key does not work. We figured that out a long time ago. So why are we doing it again? Their screams were not heard. Okay, again. Letting loose some of the bigger violent offenders is what triggered this, which I get, but that wasn't the drug offenders. And of course, I've just been arrested with my dope, and I'm looking at 20 years to go, but that's her dope. I'm going to turn on her. She's actually my dealer. And she's like, who the hell are you? I've never met you before. That's okay. She's my dealer now. So they let me go so they can go prosecute her, who had absolutely nothing to do with it. Okay? Constant problem. So obviously they figured out relatively quickly that this was a BS option, And now we need to start dismantling it, but that takes more time. People have already been sentenced under this. So what, are we going to go back and resentence those people? Which, for the most part, didn't happen. So they're stuck doing 20 and 30 years, where the guys coming in after them are doing 2 years, 3 years. And we see the potential problem. And on the federal side, it took till '07 before they gave that latitude back to federal judges to use their own judgment. They were given sentence ranges. This person could go to jail for this, theirs is all months. Feds are weird. Go to jail for this many months to this many months. And there was a wide range based on individual mitigation and aggravation factors. Okay? But it took a lot of time. Okay? Think of it, 1980s to 2007. That's a full generation before they got it changed. Now remember, crack wars started in the 80s, okay? And that's the first time the crack wars were televised on national news. It wasn't local news anymore, it was national news. So communities went, oh my God, we need to do something. And it didn't help when these news agencies, what do? What is journalism? You know, they put that kind of thing up in your face, prime time, and Ma and Peepaw living out in God knows where of Iowa are sure that their neighbors are going to become the dopers that are going to kill them in the next 12 minutes. And then you got guys pushing that the new super predator juveniles, which was you guys, by the way, you were still infants at the time. You were the new breed of violent juveniles that was going to slaughter us old people in our beds, so we need to lock up you guys and throw away the key, because, you know, it's just a whole new thing. That's where that term, super predator, came from. And even the guy who started this, guy by the name of Martin, wrote later, oops, my stats were bad. That's not quite what I meant. Yeah, well, undo it now. Okay, that's where we saw states lower the minimum age to prosecute. We'd already gotten rid of the death penalty for juveniles, but states went, okay, all right, I can't shoot the kid, but state of Washington, they are very anti-death penalty. They also can sentence an 8-year-old to life without the possibility of parole. Just shoot the kid and get it over with. 8-year-old? Are you kidding me? Okay, so that's where we saw these draconian law changes. 3 strikes and you're out. I mean, most states had something for that, but it was for some pretty high-level violent type stuff. Well, it got easier and easier. There was a guy here in Texas that stole a loaf of bread, got charged with a felony because he admitted he entered the store with the idea he was going to steal. That made it burglary. I think he stole a car, joyriding. They made it a felony because joyriding itself is a misdemeanor. And the last one was stealing some food. Again, he didn't know enough, admitted that he entered that store with the intent to steal. 25 to life. Okay. 3 strikes. Again, if it's Charlie, okay, I'm good with the 3 strikes and you're out. Okay, a person, in my opinion, shouldn't even get 3 violent strikes. But stealing bread and joyriding, really? Oh, you're a bad dude. You're a really bad dude. We need to lock you up. Okay. But we have these eras in criminal justice, and we'll go way over to the right where it's all about lock them up, throw away, execute everybody, and so on. Walk you out of the courtroom and execute you outside the door. And then it'll swing all the way back where everybody's just nice people and we need to treat them better and don't lock up anybody. We never seem to land in the middle. We go from this extreme over here where nobody needs to be locked up to everybody needs to be locked up. And the reality probably is a lot more in the center. We need to be a little more selective who we lock up. Save those very expensive prison beds for those who need to be there, for the Charlies of the world that need to be there. But the kid who got busted up with a joint in his pocket, probably doesn't need to take up a prison bed for the next 10 years. Because prison is the college of criminal justice. He may go in there as a kid with a joint. That's not how he's coming out. Even in a short period of time. One of the most infamous murders occurred here in Texas, and I mean nationwide. East Texas, a little town called Jasper. 3 drunk rednecks chained and drug a black man to his death on some farm road. Chained him up to the back of their pickup truck. Dragged him for so long he was decapitated, along with other parts. And they interviewed one of the moms, because these were all relatively young men, in their 20s. And needless to say, the brutal nature of this went nationwide. I heard about it from my family overseas. So it made overseas news as well. Anyways, he wasn't like that till he went to prison. Chances are he wasn't. But when redneck little white boy gets to prison, he's going to get an education real quick. If you're white, you're over there. If you're black, you're over there. And if you're Hispanic, you're over there. And if you're this, you're heavily segregated. And you better be extremely prejudiced in every way, shape, or form that you could possibly think of for your race. Most of the prisons are blood in, blood out to be allowed to associate with the various groups, which means they're going to give you a hit list, and you're going to kill that person, or they'll kill you. That's fine. I don't care. There's plenty more where that came from. Because they know once you kill behind bars, they have you. So if you don't want to be somebody's bitch for the entire time you're behind bars, then there's no guarantee you're still not going to be somebody's bitch. This is what you do to survive. So was he that way going in? I can't truly speak, but I did see a lot of pictures, a lot of commentary from high school, junior high, and so on. There was very little hint of any. But what came out of prison was as racist, redneck as you could shake a stick at. Totally tatted, what we call sleep, spewing that rhetoric every other second. So, here's the biting question. Who's to blame for that? We got to lay some on the prison system. And to date, we have not figured out how to fix that environment. I don't think we ever will. We just can't. We're grossly outnumbered, okay? When you're watching 1,000 inmates, you and your 2 fellow guards, like you're going to be able to do anything? All you can do is run like hell when it goes to crap, which is pretty much what they have to do, okay? So, it's pretty ugly. So it's locking them up where we want them. Where the bank robber learns how to be a rapist, along with fill in the blank, whatever else he learns behind bars. Learns how to hide evidence, learns how to protect himself from fingerprints, learns how, because that's what they do all day, is teach each other in the school of hard knocks. So we're locking them up, and we're locking them up for longer periods of time, which is all our issues with the incarceration. And out of the 2 million people we had locked up at that particular year, 25% of them was drug related, which is huge, absolutely huge. And we are the #1 incarcerator in the world, and have been, for drug offenses. That includes such lovely places such as Russia, Korea. Okay, they execute a lot more, but still. We're the ones locking them up. Maybe we need to rethink that. Questions? Obviously, the incarceration rates have had stronger impact on the minority communities, particularly Black and Hispanic. Okay, females have exploded. Now, two things at play here. One side, we've seen the violence level of females going through the roof. It's almost like, okay, you're going to consider us lesser than men? By God, we're going to prove we're just as bad. And all of a sudden, the violence level of females was just, phew. Part of it gang related, but part of it was just, wow. But females are also, if they're in a bad environment, where the males may strike out against each other or against the community, more likely what happens is the females turn inward, self-soothe through drugs. And then they turn to criminal activities to support their drug habit, 99% of the time prostitution. Okay? And unfortunately, given the cost of drugs and the inexpensive nature of most street walking prostitutes, she has to do a lot of it to even pay for her daily habit, depending on where she's at. I mean, come on, a $5 blowjob? Really? When every dose of your drug is $25? How fast can you work? Yeah, do the math. Do the math. You know, Hollywood loves to show you the high-level prostitutes, and I've met them, I've talked to them, you'd never know they were prostitutes, but we're talking the $1,000 a night girls, call girls. Those are few and far between. Very, very exclusive community. You don't walk up to, first of all, if you can find them, madam, you don't walk up to her and say, yo, man, I'd like to become one of your high-class horses. Where do I go? It don't work that way, people, okay? To even get involved in this, you better have some money because you have to buy the client list. You're just not given clients. You have to get the client list. And those things can start at $100,000 and go up from there. So what we're talking about are the streetwalkers who are getting that $5, $10 a customer, depending on what they're doing. And they're trying to pay for a drug habit that may be $300 a day. Somewhere along there, they do have to eat and so on. So you can see how this gets them in the attention of law enforcement very, very quickly, because they're out there and in your face all the time. So they get locked up all the time. We do these drug raids. Sometimes it was what we call a John raid, where it was all female officers getting out there and trying to walk in heels we'd never walked in before. As soon as the guy propositions, off he goes to jail. And then sometimes it was the other way around, where it was male officers driving around looking for the females. And then they'd arrest the females. But that's low-hanging fruit. What's that really serving? And most times they're bonded out. No bail, just bonded out. And then they're back on the streets in an hour, doing the same thing that they were an hour ago. What a waste of resources. Finally, as people start taking note of all this and start making changes, 2010s where we finally saw incarceration rates starting to drop, just slightly. We got rid of all, or not rid of, but modified a lot of this get tough, lock them up, throw away the key type of mindset. So as laws change, less people are going behind bars. Okay, this is great. A couple other things that were going on. Good time showed up again. Not everybody lost work time, but good time was gone. Now it's back. Because again, it's that incentive to keep people in line behind bars where we don't have a lot of incentives. Okay? Diversion. Get these people into a drug program. We know they work. Those might cost $20 a day versus a $50 a day prison cell. Well, again, you do the math, which is cheaper by far. Learning that you cannot take somebody. Every prisoner in this state is processed right down the street. They get processed through the walls coming into the system and back out. You got somebody who's been institutionalized, been doing 20, 30 years. Just sit out there on the sidewalk and watch. They'll step out, they're escorted out with their little bag, and they stand there. They have no idea what to do. Because the last 30 years, someone has had to tell them every minute of every day what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. They can't speak, they can't do this. Put your hands here, don't do that. There's a scene in Shawshank Redemption, which is awesome, because it really says it. The guy's 40, 50 years, I think, by that time. He's working in a store, he's got to go pee. So he asked the manager for a restroom break, and the guy goes, just go, you don't have to ask. So he goes to the bathroom, and while he's in there, he says, 50 years I've been asking permission to piss. I can't go without that permission. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. They'll come out, they don't know what to do. Think about it, if they went to jail 50 years ago, okay, you guys can't even remember 50 years ago because you weren't here. I can't. They might not even know what a checkbook is. They certainly have never seen a debit card. They don't know what online banking is. They don't know what online is, depending on what unit they were attached to. Okay, the last car they remember is the 53 T-Bird, which is actually kind of a really great car. But what we have now, okay, yeah, good luck with that. So it's stepping into a whole new world. We can't just throw them out with a $300 gate check, which, yeah. Okay, guys, all you guys probably are mostly in apartments and whatnot. Anybody get into their apartment for $300? Don't all raise your hands at once. So what the hell we expect these guys to do? Yet they are required to have a place to live and required to have a job. Even when I was a student here, $300 didn't get me into my apartment. So what are they supposed to do? So we had to fix that. And we established that lovely thing known as drug courts. Those courts are only for drug offenders. They have all the resources available in that area that are known to them. They have counselors, they have lawyers that deal with drug offenders, they have judges that are experienced with the drug offenders. Everything is about drugs. So they know the best possible outcome for the average drug offender. Okay? So, different things were put into play to help ease the lock them up and throw away the key part. Doesn't mean we can't lock up the Pablo Escobars of the world. But the kid with the joint, or the few tabs of whatever it was that he has, probably don't need to spend 10 years in prison behind it. Believe it or not, that is all.